Good morning to those in the West and afternoon to the rest of us. Welcome to another CHRA webinar. Today we'll be hearing all about the new Community Housing Transformation Center. My name is Dominika Krzeminska and I'm the Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives at CHRA. I'll be today's host. Thank you all for joining us. So the Community Housing Transformation Center, or the Center, is officially opening its virtual doors on December 13th. The Center is a new pan-Canadian nonprofit organization that will work with housing organizations across Canada to drive transformation, sustainability, and growth in community housing. The Center is bringing together the expertise, resources, and promising practices from across the sector into one place to help housing providers find solutions to their challenges, identify gaps, and find promising transformative practices to study and scale up. The Center's Executive Director, Stéphane Corriveau, is here today to provide an overview of what the Center is and how your organizations and tenants can benefit from its funding programs and resources. So I now have the pleasure of introducing to you Stéphane Corriveau. Stéphane is the first Executive Director of the Community Housing Transformation Center. Prior to this role, he was President of the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association and Executive Director of the Quebec Nonprofit Housing Network, Réseau Québécois des OSBL Habitation. Stéphane is also Director, North America of the Housing International Coalition. Over the last 30 years, he has gathered experiences in Canada, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East as field operator, academic, and advisor for local, regional, and national nonprofits. He's been involved in policymaking processes at municipal, provincial, and federal levels. He actively contributed to the development of thousands of new housing units and played key roles in restructuration strategies for big and small nonprofit organizations facing significant challenges, including the end of their operating agreement, bad asset management, and tenant relations. Welcome, Stéphane.
Hello. So, well, thank you very much, Dominika, for your kind introduction. And hello, everybody over there. I must say that it's a bit intimidating having all those people listening to me, but me seeing none of you. So I don't know if, if I do something very bad, don't be shy of typing in and making all kind of sound through a keyboard. I hope the reverberation will come to me and we'll be able to react in a positive way. So thank you very much again for being here. The Community Housing Transformation Center, as Dominika said, is here to kind of put one more tool in the tool sets available for the sector to go further on. And well, basically, okay, well, as she said, there's another webinar. Actually, there's two of them. There's one on December 9th that will be in English, but there will be another one on December 11th in French. So donc le 11 décembre, il va y avoir un webinaire en français. And those two webinars are not going to be hosted by me, but by the program managers of the center will be able to answer more technical questions about the forms and every little detail about how things are going to be processed. This webinar will be more about the vision we have, the goal, the general understanding, what you should be aiming for in your proposal, what you should be understanding the role of the center, how we intend to interact with the sector and the organizations, and what's the vision we have for the whole sector in terms of playing a role in the housing market altogether. So basically, we are in a changing environment. I mean, that is always true, but I would say it's especially true these days with the end of the operating agreement, with the new housing strategy, with the fact that many provinces and cities around the country are coming up with very different projects and programs, but all of them basically coming with different approach and support. There's a tighter and tighter integration between the involvement of the different departments of different ministry, both provincial and federal, but also not only those that are strictly in terms of housing, but there's a lot of expansion that happened over the issue of supportive housing that were not there years ago, and that is moving on fastly. There's change of population. Tenants that are coming in our buildings are not the same tenants that were coming 20, 30 years ago. They're quite often with a higher level of social vulnerabilities, and basically we're not what we were 50 years ago. There's also many positive elements. I've said some positive, some more challenging, but among the positive elements is that 50 years ago, when many of our organizations were launched and started, we had a lot of goodwill, we had a lot of energy, but we had no money. I mean, everything we were building was, I mean, there was money available from CMHC and some other program from different provincial government and cities and churches support. But basically, we as organizations across the sector own very little of our stock and own very little resources. At this point, we are in a different position where we have the ownership and some would say the liabilities that goes with it, but we certainly have the assets that we were not able to have years before. So we cannot just say, let's keep going where we were and what we've been doing for the last few years. Let's have a quick look about the customer's profile, because after all, it's a market thing. So the interesting thing, this chart there is something that you've seen quite often. It's quite often being referred to the continuum of housing. I'd rather use the expression the spectrum, because the continuum is about the people, the spectrum is about the sector, and this is a different kind of thing. Where so on the far left, this is what we are, providing for people that have low income, and on the far right is for people who have low needs, I would say, in terms of support. So that helps us to understand what we're doing and how the sector is being managed and split. And even if there's more, I mean, more or less half of the picture is on the left-hand side is what we're doing. That do not represent the reality in terms of the part of the housing spectrum. The housing spectrum is mainly private ownership and private sector rental and private sector stuff like that, while more than half of that chart is dedicated to community housing. So one has to keep in mind that even if we have many segments, we are not so much a large part of this sector. The other important thing to understand is that none of the spectrum, is free of support, and that's okay. We're not complaining about it, but one must understand that even if we are quite often being told, and it's being said around that, the community housing sector and the social housing and the co-op housing and the non-profit housing and the land trust and whoever else and the public, all the people that are trying to see housing as something that answer needs and that answer rights to housing, are always there outside begging for money and resources from the different departments and different ministries and different politicians and different authorities, whether it be municipal or other. The reality is that it's not true that we are asking for more. In fact, we are not receiving, I would argue, in large part of what we're receiving, as much as a large section of the private sector. If you consider everything, including the infrastructure that needs to be built to provide proper housing to people in the private sector market, if you look to the different tax break and the different incentive to improve your houses and stuff like that, you will realize quickly that actually the private so-called self-sustaining market is not there on its own. CMHC plays a major role, and the different government policies that control the mortgage industry play a major role in shaping and structuring that market. So, and there's money there. There's huge amount of money that is being committed one way or another, through guarantee, through insurance, through infrastructure, through and there's even costs like if you support urban sprawling, then you end up with more costs in terms of transit, more costs in terms of schools and in terms of hospital, while most of the nonprofit sector, even in the rural area, is where it's more density. It's typically our buildings are in the heart of the cities. They are where there's high density and low cost of implementation, even if it's most of the cost is being openly disclosed for our projects. The reality is that at the end of the day, we don't receive more money than our friends from the private sector. But overall, we are facing a situation in Canada now that explains why a large part of the crisis we're living in is that there's a supply deficit that occurred over the last few years. And that supply deficit is basically in the lower income, but not the poorest people. I mean, there's a consequence to the fact that what we used to have in our inner cities and even in rural area was people that had full-time minimum wage kind of job could find a proper housing for themselves. And at this point in this country, that's a problem. And that problem generated two impacts. First, it pushed people that used to be able to fend for themselves into the more crisis kind of thing, because they can't, and that brings all kind of consequence, because you cannot shelter yourself properly, then you end up living in bad conditions, or your health is deteriorating, and your social relationship are deteriorating, and you start having not the proper social behaviors that bring all kind of consequences. And then the other impact is that those that manage not to be sinking, if I can use that expression, on that poorest part of the spectrum, they go on the other part, but the consequences that they got to empty totally their pocket. They have no more margin, so it costs them a lot of money and create a crisis there, and it makes a lot of people sad and unhappy on the other side of the spectrum. So we got to do something about that, not only because as a sector we want to do it as an organization, but it has social consequences, and this is after all what we're about. So in order to fix the problem, we have to intervene on terms of developing proper supply. Well, proper supply means that we should be able to answer all the spectrum properly, including the effort that we have to do now is towards the middle of the spectrum. This would actually make, I mean, everybody won't be so happy. There will still be sad people that have all kind of other issues and problems that we have to deal with them. But there's there would be a better situation, and people that are not that rich would still be able to afford a proper housing, either through home ownership for a more modest house, or through rental, which is quite okay, but in more proper housing without rats and without any over humidity or lacking of heating and stuff like that. So as a sector, we've got to learn to occupy the whole spectrum, not only being dedicated only for the poor people that have lots of needs and little money, but also to be able to become sustainable, to be able to interact and intervene to the whole wideness of the spectrum. And this is a large part of the intervention that we're going to push for, that for us to have a sustainable sector doesn't go only in this understanding that each provider got enough money to cover their costs, but as a sector we need to be able to intervene to make the housing spectrum sustainable, to make it that socially it makes sense. And we've through different studies and reflection, we came to the conclusion that we should have somehow about 20% of the housing stock across Canada should be owned, operated, managed one way or another, with that in mind. So it would be co-op, would be non-profit, would be land trust again, and public housing and whatever. All of those formula that first take into consideration the needs and the right, rather than just seeing housing as a commodity. So if we achieve that, we will achieve sector sustainability. We're quite convinced about it. So now to do that, we need to scale up. What do we mean by scaling up? I mean, of course, every one of our organization needs to have organizational growth, but organizational growth is basically looking through to think through the wrong side of the binocular. Well, it's not the wrong side of the binocular. We have to look at it because every organization needs to beef up to be able to face the challenges that they're being facing in terms of their capacity to manage, their capacity to have financial viability, to have good tenant relationship, to diminish their environmental footprints and so on. But it's an issue of working individually. So the center is there to help you achieve organizational growth, but that's only part of the answer. We think that it's good, so you see the impact. So if you're small, you do some organizational growth, you have a nicer tree, a bit bigger tree, things goes forward. But we could go a bit further, and rather than just having organizational growth one by one, if you grow through partnership, then we can actually achieve more for everyone. So we have those small providers, because the sector is quite segmented as the way we are now. I mean, most of the providers in Canada at this point will have a one building, one board kind of situation. Some of them have a bit more than that. But if we start having interaction, I mean, like you have in the forest, or like you have in the picture we had before, you know, the different trees use a different nutriment in the soil and actually help each other because they share the light and they share everything. So at the end of the day, each of the one that are involved in a good partnership grow and get in a better condition. But that's growth through partnership. But if we widen the scope a little bit more, then we get into sector development. And sector development is not only about the individual organizations that are doing better, but it's, or even a small network of organization, but to understand the different things that are coming in the discussion. So yes, there's a housing provider, but there's the interaction with the service provider, which are the people in the organization that help the housing provider to do things better. So for what we're thinking about when we're saying housing providers and service provider, well, housing provider is quite obvious, those who provide houses, but service provider will be organizations that help doing bulk buying, that help concentrate the knowledge and development, that help share basically services or provide services with a level of expertise that are useful. Maybe you use them only once a year, once 2 years, once every year, every 5 years. But if you try to make every of those housing provider own and that capacity is very expensive as a sector to make sure everyone has all of the knowledge and all of the capacities. While if you use it only once in a while, other can concentrate that capacity and share the wealth when you need it. So you start having that kind of relationship. So the birds is bringing new seeds from the forests, and the birds are eating the little insect that are bad, but they generated all kind of stuff. So there's that whole ecosystemic kind of thing that makes it better for everyone, not only for the individual provider, but the whole sector. So this is what the center is about. So we're there to help organizational growth, yes, but we want to make a focus and try to push everyone in the sector to think bigger, to scale up. You go from your own organization to see, can I do something with somebody else, and can I do something with everybody else through the sector? This is what we got to go. And the reason why we need to go there is because, in fact, we're on the verge of extinction. If one is to look at the situation where we were in Canada in 1996, where about 7% of the housing market was nonprofit, co-op, public housing, and so on. At the last census, we were down to 3%. So that is not sustainable. It's not sustainable for us. It's not sustainable for people. You can draw lines, I mean, that are the total opposite. The rise of mass homelessness in Canada is directly associated with that. The rise of the people that are not homeless but are not paying through their nose to pay for their rent and all of those situations. This is directly related to the fact that only we're down to 3% of the market. So CMHC set the goal that was by 2030, that's their organizational aspirational goal, that by 2030 we should be able to, that everybody living in Canada should have proper housing. Well, to reach that, we need to reach 20%. So we won't be reaching 20% by having, you know, a one-by-one thing kind of approach. We got to go from saying we want to protect and sustain each of the organization into we want to grow each of the organization. But we want to grow over the organization. What we mainly want to grow is a sector, and this is very important in the message. And it's a big challenge. I mean, we at this point in 2016 to reach the point that is, you know, everyone has a home in Canada means that we would need 2,792,740. Big number, housing unit that would be dedicated for nonprofit co-op community sector, basically. But we cannot have that as a target because between now and 2030, population growth is going to keep going unless something very terrible happens. So we won't gonna wish for that. So we have big and huge goals to deal for. So this is what a sector approach is, what we intend to support as much as possible. Now, through the research and discussion and reflection and knowledge that we've gathered at the center, but as a sector together over the last decades, we think that what's needed to be done is that, well, first there's some internal management. We cannot rent at lower cost than what it is. I mean, we cannot be sustainable if we charge less than what it costs, not only to pay for the day-to-day of running our different businesses, but to plan for capital repair. We got to be networking, partnering, sharing, leveraging, multiplies our capacity. I've spoke about that already. Government will need to help tenants by providing them with housing allowance sufficient to cover their rent, because I mean, it's good enough to have the first line that says, well, we got to charge the proper rent. But if we charge that and we cannot provide the housing to people who can, if we try to provide housing to people who cannot pay the rent, there will be no difference. So at the end of the day, there needs to be public policy there that makes a difference. We're going to have sound asset management that will allow for leverage for our organization. If you don't maintain your building properly, you won't be able to go the next step. So we have to do it for ourselves, but for the sector altogether and for the people who need it. Expansion will be looked first at via acquisition. Right now in the market, there's a race. There's a number of REITs and I would call them sharks, literally, that are busy buying everything that's still in the middle of that spectrum that I was presenting earlier. They're busy buying everything there, and they're making the hole deeper and deeper, and will make it more and more difficult for us to fill it up. So we got to stop that. And stop the only way to stop that is to actually get ourselves in that market and take basically buy that stock through all means and ways possible, because this is how we will make you cannot fill a bucket if there's a hole at the bottom. So we're gonna fill that hole, and then we can go forward to having a nicer bucket well full. And of course, we need to diversify, well, that goes together, diversify the sector portfolio to also serve middle income people. And we will need public policies that actively support the sector. There's been big step forward done by the federal government with the National Housing Strategy, but that was a first big step. It's not the last one, certainly. They have to do more, so does most of the provincial government and most of the municipalities. Housing is something central, and everything is related to it, and if we don't decide to tackle it seriously, it cannot rest only on the shoulder of the community housing sector. We've got to do our thing. We've got to be brilliant, efficient, dynamic, positive, constructive, and everything, but it cannot be done only by us. Public authorities have to share in and put their shoulder on the wheel as well. Now, at the end of the day, as I was saying earlier, the transformed community housing field of action should not be only left on the left side of the spectrum, but we should go doing all the way around those things. So the key words there would be diversification, both as organization, as a sector, collaborations among us, and acquisition. Okay, now down to the center directly. Sorry for that long introduction. I hope people are still online and you haven't you haven't give up on the proposal. The mission center of this the center is to the mission statement of the center is to support the long-term evolution of community housing providers by dispersing funds, supports, and help to increase organizational capacity. Now, how do we do that? Well, we've, as a continuation of the introduction we were doing, so the key element that we intend to support, the vision that we have, so how we will be looking at proposal is that at the provider level, we want to enhance governance capacity. We want to have boards that understand what they're about, and they have a vision that is not just about maintaining the building, which is very important, of course, but how can you go forward? How can you do more? How can you do better services, more people? So you have the people who have the knowledge and the capacity on your board. We want to have a reduced environmental footprint, because all of that is useless. It's at the end of the day, we all end up being cooked like bacon because of the some people are laughing. I'm hearing you through the so anyway, we need to be healthy and have a healthy planet, so we have a healthy housing, and the other way around is true as well. So develop tenants engagement, because that's a big part of what community housing is all about. It's providing houses for people that need housing, and we cannot do that with people that are being looked at as just merchandise. We've got to deal with people in a human way. That doesn't mean that it's not business savvy, but it means that we have to be something a little bit more than just a private sector provider. We got to have management that is uplift. That doesn't mean that people that are there are not good. It means that we all benefit from more training, more capacity, mentorship programs, training programs of all sorts, and being able to manage more things faster, better, nicer, cheaper. Everything needs training and capacity. We got to increase the financial viability of the sector. Too many of us are actually being managed with a deficit. Maybe at the end of the day, we are not making a deficit every day, every year, but overall, we don't make enough, we don't put enough money on the side to do capital repair, for example. We don't put money on the side to be able to do development. So this is what it means when we say financial viability. And we got to advance interagencies collaboration, because the whole sector is there. Now, sector-wide level, what does it mean? That we got to enlarge the market share that we're occupying. We got to broaden our offer to middle and low, not only the low income, but the middle income households need to see that community housing is not just a path for those that have that have difficulties in life, that are unable to fend for themselves. I mean, other societies that are not seen as society, that are you know, inefficient, unorganized, uneconomically viable. I'm thinking here Germany, Austria, Sweden, Netherlands, Denmark, and so on. They have a much higher ratio actually than the 20%, and not seen as a social stigma to be living in a co-op or a non-profit or some sort of public housing. It's just seen as an intelligent way of managing your resources, both individually and collectively. So we got to get to those level of understanding socially. We got to have a diversified business model. I mean, we cannot just be things managing some small thing. We got to be able, some of us will still be small, but some of us will have to grow and to get into a more dynamic process. We got to strengthen sector support facilities. So I was talking about, you know, we want to go to development. You don't need to learn all the rope of everything that is related to development. If you want to do one more building, we should have knowledge centers that will allow us to do those kind of things. And many, I mean, there's example of that thing that exists right now in the sector, coast to coast to coast, but we need to have more and bigger and stronger of those center support. And again, interagencies collaboration is the key in that process. And then we've got to collectively, that's not going to be so much in action from the center, but collectively we got to be able to develop, and now there's a call for government and private partners that we can develop partnership with. We got to improve access to long-term capital. We got to increase government support for tenants, and we got to have fiscal and financial support for community housing providers that are being provided by the governmental structure. And in that sense, our sector is not asking anything that other economic sector in the country are doing. I mean, think about the car industry, think about the forest industry, think about the mining industry, think about the computer industry, think about whatever industry, the airplane industry, whatever across the country. None of those sectors is going without active government support. So if government is serious about, and government with an S are serious about the fact that they say people need to be housed properly, well, they got to have policies. In fact, they have policies at this point, but they have policies that are not completed. They got to complete them, and they got to be able to work over the whole spectrum. Now, getting even closer to about the center itself, where we're coming from during the National Housing Strategy consultation. A number of the sector organizations such as CHRA, but the Cooperative Housing Federation and the Agency for Cooperative Housing, and ANFA and RQH and BCNPHA and so on, came together, and we basically said, well, we need a center like that would help share the good news and help the providers individually and the sector organization to go ahead. Well, we got a positive answer, and CMHC then gave us some money so we can set up the center and use the center to do basically three things. So we're doing fundings, we're doing information, and we're here to support partnership. So how will we do information? Well, you'd be amazed actually when you start looking around at how many knowledge and capacity exists in across the country about what's possible to do. The problem in large is that most of the providers are not aware of the different resources that are available for them. So we're pushing for doing that huge inventory of all the knowledge and the resources and the manual and the handbooks and the service providers and the individual that have that are the capacity. And we try to take all of that and put them in one large database that will be available for everybody. And in that database, that we hope to reach that tipping point where there's a critical mass where people not only will be there to consult it, but everyone that has something to share with others will be welcome to come and put it themselves in the resource center database. So that thing will help service provider to, well, first it's an advertising platform, it's self-serve and posting, and it will allow us to identify the gaps, that if there's either something that exists in other part of the country is not available somewhere, or it's not available nowhere, but we think it would make sense overall having that inventory that at this point doesn't exist. Neither CMHC or provincial government or any sectoral organization have that inventory. At first we thought, no, well, once we're going to have a few hundreds resources list there, we'll have everything. Now we understand that the universe we're supposed to cover as at least 10,000 things should be in the database. So we're far from having complete that census, So please don't be shy to put it in there. And of course, well, for the housing provider themselves, what we will do there is, well, you can access the database by yourself, and we will be there to help you access it if you have problem finding yourself what you need there. So you have a problem, we'll basically you look there to find where's the answer is. Anybody had the same problem? Is there a resource that help you to fix it? And if you can't find yourself in the center, well, the staff of you can't find yourself in the website, the staff of the center will be there to help you through email or through phone conversation to find what's the good resources there. Now, funding, I mean, I kept it for longer, for a further point in the presentation, because of course, this is everything that will maintain your interest. Well, there's a lot of people with idea across the country in the sector, and we got some money. So the idea of simply is say, well, the money will go to you if you have the right idea, and that should help you transform, evolve your organization. Now, how much money are we talking about? We're talking about $50 million that is available. That $50 million is being split in two different large chunk. A first chunk of 10 million, sorry, billions would be nice, but it's only 10 million at this point. So, but it's a message, I guess, to CMHC and the federal government if they want to increase their contribution, they welcome. So $10 million to support community-based tenant initiative. What does it mean, community-based tenant initiative? It's basically we want to increase the capacity of the tenant that are living in our building, but also in elsewhere across the country, to be more aware of the capacity and the potentiality of living in nonprofit, living in co-op, living, pushing for more engagement from themselves and being socially aware and socially active actor for the housing reality. They cannot be seen only as a commodity that you buy and sell and rent. I mean, these people are actually people, and they should have something to say and do about how things go. And then we have $40 million that are dedicated to both local project and sectoral impact project. So the local project, that means we'll provide small and medium contribution to community housing provider. We will facilitate emerging model of development, support consolidating initiative among existing partner, encourage project in region where gaps in community housing services are found, and introduce or enhance indigenous knowledge in our organization, vision, and actions. So all of that should increase the community housing ability and expertise altogether. So each of the providers should be a bit stronger and better, hopefully. And then the second layer is what we call a sectoral impact gap filling. Well, fund medium to large contribution towards regional and national scales proposal that should strengthen services with long-term transformative benefit to a wide group of provider. So if something is missing in one part of the country that would help many providers at once, this is the kind of thing we want to do. Contribute to structural initiative to fill gap in the sector, rev-up process involved improving sector-wide residency. And then back to the tenants, well, small contribution for a local organization, would it be the association with a tenant of a nonprofit, or it could be a neighborhood association, tenants association as private sector, it's open for them. It could be a nonprofit housing provider, it could be a co-op provider that want to do something special, beef up the involvement and the capacity of their tenants. Well, this is what it's about. So value and respect indigenous knowledge will be an important part of it. That's part of the reconciliation process, and indigenous people are more numerous in terms of ratio amongst our tenants than they are in the total population. So we got to learn to take attention and pay attention to that and value that contribution. And then we want to increase participation, tenants' participation in the housing and decision project that affect them in defining services. So basically money will be attributed. How would it be attributed? Well, there's two big questions. There's what and there's who. So money will be dedicated will be allocated according to the impacts of the proposal you're coming and the priority. We'll see a bit more in the next slide. And who, well, there won't be any quota at this point, at least this is not what we're planning, but we've kind of say there will be no empty-handed segment of the sector. Every region, every sub part, would it be population-wise or would it be kind of provider, there will be resources for all distributed. I mean, of course, according to the capacity that we have in terms of money. So the way every project are going to be looked at through the lens that I'm going to present it now. So there's the impact element. I said, so what do we mean when we say impact? So impact is how much money are you asking for impacting on how many units? I mean, it's not It's not, none of those pie chart are going to be definitive in terms of, you don't make the cut or you do make the cut, but it's the total value of each of them. So how much cost per unit are you coming in? I mean, if it costs $200,000 for you to do something for a 5-unit apartment building, well, we're probably going to say, well, you're going to find resources elsewhere, and we're not going to be able to fund that. Well, will that bring structural growth, increase the capacity of your organization? Is that replicable? Is that innovative? So if it doesn't have to be innovative, can be something that somebody else does. I mean, someone that would say, well, I've heard about something very fantastic. Up to now, I've been writing with a pencil, and I've heard that there's word processing available, where you don't have to invent the word processing, but to bring a word processor in your organization, that's innovative. That's the understanding you have to have of innovative. And then there's priorities. So the priorities are, you've got to improve the governance of your organization, the financial viability of it, develop better asset management, make sure that the buildings that you have are well taken care of, and that you can use them. Once they're well taken care of, you can use them to leverage your position on the market. Do you have, can you improve your social inclusion policy? Can you make sure that there's groups that are usually not so welcome anywhere in the society can find a place in your building and your program and activities? And improve your environmental footprints, which by improving it, of course, doesn't mean that you have a bigger footprint. It means you have a smaller one. Reconciliation with Indigenous people, again, this is something that is recurrent in the vision of the center and how we want to do things. Then there's something that is a bit more complicated maybe for people to accept or deal with, but that's going to be part of the life, is that what's the center role? Basically, the question is, if you come with that great idea, that great proposal that you have, and I'm not challenging that every proposal that we're going to receive are going to be great and fantastic, but we're going to ask ourselves a question, and maybe you should ask yourself a question, because according to the size of the resources we have, $50 million is a lot of money, but if you split it in 10 different provinces, 3 territories, thousands of providers, at the end of the day, that's not so much money per provider per housing, so we won't be sending a $10 check to everybody. We're going to concentrating it. So the question is, why that great and fantastic idea that you're coming forward with haven't been implemented yet? Why do you need the center to be able to do it? So there's been a demonstration of the added value of the center in that discussion, because otherwise, do it. I mean, don't have to wait for us to do it if you have a great idea. So this is a different question. And then there's the intrinsic qualities of the proposal itself. So is it clear what you're asking for, what you're planning to do? I mean, when one is reading the proposal, does it make sense? Is it coherent? There's a beginning, a middle, and a end, and so on. Do you plan to do it on your own, or do you plan to do with other people in other organizations? Is it feasible? I mean, there's grand plans. It's sometimes very clear, but it's not sometimes very feasible. So does the budget match the goals that you're doing? Is it reasonable to say that an organization of your size is going to achieve result of that size, and so on? So and basically, does it answer a needs, which is quite an important element of the discussion as well. So those are basically how we will look at the what, and each of those little thing will get a % of evaluation of the value of the proposal. And then there's the who. Well, sadly enough, the who, you have very little to say about because the who, and so will we. The who will be evolving with time, because let's say, and I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but let's say that in the next 3 weeks after we start on December 13th of receiving application, and we're very efficient and we give the money to everybody that needs to get it. But then we realize that, we receive 500 proposals and 450 of them are coming from Southern Ontario. Well, that's very nice. And that doesn't mean that none of those 450 proposals are not good. But eventually there will be a cap. There will be, we'll say, well, we need to make sure that there is something for people in Northern Manitoba and people in Newfoundland and people in Quebec and people in BC and so on. So eventually, if there's an overlap, not an overlap, but an overfill of proposal coming from one region, the selection process will be tighter for those. The same thing goes for, and if there's an overfill of proposal coming from the co-op or an overfill coming from the nonprofit, that will make the the hole through which the proposal has to go will tighten and tighten to make sure that there's enough for the other section. And service provider as well. So if you're providing service to nonprofit, so some money will go to the service provider, but some money will go to the housing providers as well. So we're going to keep a balance there. So your proposal can be fantastic, but if the whole, so there will be a section there. And again, the demographics, so indigenous people and seniors and linguistic and rural and urban and so on. So we'll be looking to make sure that there's a balance there, that no segment of the sector is being left empty. Transformation Center, so to summarize it, we are the mean to achieve that project that always get pushed back, a source of inspiration and networking, a gateway solution, a stepping stone for other funds, a service gap identifier and filler, a facilitator between sector stakeholder, a promoter of services. What we are not, so don't waste your time writing a proposal coming for that, but we are not, well, that's one. I'm doubtful that for the first line you will come with a proposal saying that we're not in preparation for government divestment. So if CMHC, or federal government, or anybody else think that because they chip in 50 million, they'll be off the hook. We will still, I think, as a sector, make sure that they understand that there's a social need. Housing is something that needs to be supported, and not only through insurance program for mortgage. People that don't have the money to buy need to have some sort of support as well. We're not an advocacy group, and there's something missing there, but we're not there for brick and mortar. I don't know why the third item doesn't appear, but I can tell you we're not there for capital investment. So all of that is very exciting, and I'm using the opportunity of having everybody online now to say that we are hiring. The team is not completed yet. We are looking for people that will bring in knowledge that are specific to different region of the country, different type of ownership, different type of management, different type of service providing. So if you are interested in working at the center, don't bother about what's the job opening is or not. Send your CV, show us how interesting and good you are, and we're gonna make sure that we find a way to welcome you in our organization. The other thing is, you probably, well, you've seen the chart, so we can clearly argue that we have a structured and thoughtful process about how we're going to select, but still for a proposal to make sense, it needs to fill all the little gap and tick all the little box and everything. But then there's the reality. And nobody can claim, at least our vision is that nobody can claim that a small team of people centralized in one office, even if they're coming from all over the country, know everything and know the ground and know the dynamic and know the potential, especially if you want to say, you know, we're doing sector development and we're doing partnership and all of those things. So it's not just as simple as looking to the financial record of one provider, say, well, they're viable, they're able to do it, and go ahead. You need to have a vision and understanding of what's happening in that sector. So in order to be able to do that, we want to have reviewers. So that's a volunteer position. So tough luck for those who are looking for money, but that's a volunteer position. And when we will be receiving proposals that are, let's say, from northern Saskatchewan or southern Alberta or whatever, that saying that we want to do something in that region, well, the center staff will make sure that the little box are being thick and everything. But once this is being done, the actual value of the proposal will be looked by your peers. So if you want to be on a peer review, you will not be asked if you don't have knowledge about that sector and that field of operation. This is not what you will be asked for. Once a year, twice a year, thrice a year, depending on how many proposals we're getting in and what kind of content they have, we will be inviting you to say, well, we have a proposal in a field that you know. So we'll be asking you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, to sign a non-conflict of interest situation. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you are going to be asked to read the proposal, see how good it is, how feasible it is, how realistic it is in your neck of the wood, and how things can be done over there, and does it make sense? So this is how finally the decision will be taken. So the center is, when we say it's sector-led, well, it means something. It's not just that people that are working on the sector are there, but people that are on the board of the center are from the sector, and that the people who are actually taking the decision, i.e. the reviewers, actually are also from the sector. So it's not something that we can, if a proposal is being accepted, thanks to the money from the government, but if the proposal is being refused, it's going to be thanks to your peers because they think it's not a good one. So it's inward looking in that sense. It's not that we want to be responsible. We have to take the means to do it, and we need to do it in a fair way. So this is the way we imagine to do it. So again, there will be, I know some of you were looking to, what kind of form are we going to fill and how will it be? Well, that is for another webinar, my friends. December 9 at noon Montreal time. That will be happening in English, and December 11 in French. So there, the program manager that are in the center will be there, will make a presentation for the actual forms that you're going to fill. And one of the reasons why you're not being displayed that now is, well, first, because I wouldn't be, I guess, the best one to speak about that. But the second thing is that we're still busy finalizing the last few dots on the I and bar on the T's of those forms as we speak right now. So if you want more information and you want to register as a reviewer to put forward your candidacy as a staff, or be first in line to present a proposal, you got to go to center.support, where all the information that I gave and much more is available and will be updated regularly. I suggest that you actually subscribe to our newsletter so you are receiving it up to date every time there's something new coming up happening. So only 9 days to go, and now I'm turning to you, Dominica, to tell me what did I miss and what do I need to answer now. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Such a new center, and so much information that I think everyone is going to have a lot of questions, whether that's today or in the coming days or whenever. And I know that your staff and yourself are available, so I would highly suggest checking out that website and definitely registering for the newsletter, because that's where I'm getting all my information about the center. So thank you. So right now we'd like to open up the floor to your questions. So if you have any questions, I would ask that you type them into the dialog box if you haven't already, and we'll get to as many as we can in the next 15 minutes or so. So I see that we have a couple already. So Stefan, I'm gonna open this up. All right, when you say service providers, are these providers to the housing organizations sector or services to tenants? How do you define service provider?
All above.
Okay.
So it would be, for example, I'm thinking about groups such as in the Ottawa area, there's something called CADCO that would be a service provider to help other nonprofit to build and develop. It could be an organization such as UNFA that has programs that help people, or BCNPHA or Manitoba Nonprofit Housing and so on. It could be in Quebec, there's a large network of something called the Technical Resource Group. It could be something that, so basically all of those different type of organization that help, but it could be for the tenant, then you will be thinking about things such as local branches of FRAPRU, community tenants associations, would be as well that kind of providers.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question, and the question is that is financial literacy one of the aspects of the community-based tenant initiative, or did this change?
No, well, no, the short answer is it hasn't changed. Maybe I haven't said it clearly enough, but their interaction with the tenants is not so much to help tenant, well, I mean, not so much, we'll look at every proposal that are coming in. But the idea is not so much to help tenants, let's say, learn how to write down a budget for themselves, and that, no, you have to pay this much, you keep that much amount of money to pay your rent at the end of the month. The idea is to make tenants able to involve themselves in the management and development of the housing sector. So most of the nonprofit, certainly most of the co-op and many other service providers were actually started by tenants who got involved and say, well, we want to change the situation we are living in, and those were the nucleus from which the project and proposal started up. So we want to help support the creation of new nucleus like that. We want to help people to be able to involve themselves and not just to be tenant that pay the rent, but tenant that shape their futures.
Thank you. The next question is more of a comment, and I see two of them. So I assume one of us said the wrong day for December 9th, but just a clarification, December 9th is a Monday, and that's the next webinar that's being put on by the center, and it's specifically going to walk you through how to apply for the programs and more information about the two funding programs. So the next question is, will there be resources online about new development funding opportunities across Canada?
Well, the center will certainly try to help and challenge, including through the resource center, the inventory of resources. So yes, everything that we can gather as information will be put there. And if you hear about something that we haven't yet registered in the database, please tell us. We will be doing everything we can to keep up and build a database. But we're not CMHC in the sense that CMHC and the different provinces and municipal government that are providing with programs, we will try to track them up and to make sure that they're being advertised and made available through our database. But it's not going to be the main thing that we will refer them. We will refer you if you come to the database to this is where you can find that and this funding possibilities over there.
Yeah. Okay. The next question is also a comment, and I'll answer this one. It's someone is registered for the newsletter, has not received anything yet. Is it active? Yes, it is. I would suggest going to Center's website and reapplying for or re-registering for the newsletter. There may have, I'm not sure, there may have been some sort of technical difficulty, but there is an active newsletter now. So I have another question is, do organizations need to have a tenant association in place before applying for the program?
No, actually, you don't need to have a tenant association. The proposal could be that you will be setting up a tenant association, for example.
Okay, great. And the answer to the next one, when the grant application will be available, is December 13th is when it will be available. Yeah. What is the deadline going to be?
That's an excellent question. There's actually no deadline.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
We only have live line, but basically the point is that we don't have deadline, because as you know, as soon as we receive a proposal, the proposal is looked at its face value and is being accepted or declined. But most of the time we hope to be able to say yes, and if declined, most of the time we hope to be able to say, well, you know, if there was a bit more emphasis on that aspect, or a bit less on this one, and something, well, that would probably help shape the proposal in a way that has more likelihood to be accepted. There's no competition in the sense that we have money for several years ahead of us. So eventually we might end up saying, you know, there's a cap and we cannot go further. But for certainly the first few months, I would say the first year, proposal that is not possible to process that proposal within the first week of the first month, we're just going to put it in the next round of funding if the proposal is going to be on top of the shelf for the next round of funding that we will get.
Okay. I see that we have a lot of questions coming in. We won't be able to get to all of them. And again, as I said, you can ask your questions at the next webinar, or if you go online, there is contact information there for the center. So I'm going to ask you this question: how does someone actually add their organization or resources to the inventory that you are creating, the resource center?
At this point, it's not as easy as it should be and as it will be, but it's still through the website. So just send us something that makes us aware that you exist and you're doing something within the next couple of weeks, and we hope it will be by December 13. Might take a few more days for that aspect. The funding proposal will be ready by December 13, that's for sure. But to self-register on the inventory, that will eventually by Christmas or early next year, to the latest of the latest, will be there, and you will be able to self-register. It will be a clear process that you do online on the website.
Thank you. I think I'm going to ask two more questions. The first is, are First Nations able to apply through this program, or through the two funding programs?
Yes, in terms of as long as what you will be providing is what we call community housing, so non-profit, community controlled, community owned, community managed, and dedicated to answering the need of housing and the right to housing. We don't have any other rules at this point that says a provider would not be authorized to present a proposal.
All right. And the final question that I'm going to ask, and I apologize to those that I did not ask, is tenant organizing projects that might translate across various housing locations. Would those belong in the sector-wide grant stream or the community-based tenant initiatives stream?
Well, of course, without reading the actual proposal, it's difficult to answer a specific thing, but both would spontaneously, it's possible for, I would say there would be an entrance for both. My intuitive reaction is that strategy-wise, probably go first with the Tenants Initiative Fund, but we'll see. And again, we're not there to refuse proposal. We're there to, as much as possible, try to answer the need of the sector within the means of our resources. So if a proposal is good, but we have difficulties, we'll try to find a way and say, well, no, just let's work together to make it viable through the sector transformation rather than the tenant initiative, or the other way around. We'll try to work with you to make your proposal going forward.
Great. Thank you, Stefan. So that's all the time that we have for today's webinar. I'd like to thank all of you, the silent audience, for participating. Silent, but not, since you are asking a lot of questions. And also to Stefan Corriveau, thank you for joining us today. We actually have a webinar in the next 15 minutes. It's the same webinar again. So if you want to come back, there is space at that one. So if you'd like to come back and ask more questions, be sure to, you could still register for that one. It's on CHRA's website. So today's webinar recording will be shared on CHRA's website in the coming days. You'll also be emailed a survey about today's webinar in the next hour that will help us here at CHRA plan for future webinars. If you tuned in late, like I said, we are repeating this webinar in 15 minutes. You can join by registering on our website. And finally, a little plug for us and a reminder to those who have not yet renewed their CHRA membership for 2020 or are interested in becoming members. This year, we're opening up a super early bird registration for the 2020 Congress. And to access the member discounted rates, you will need to have an active 2020 membership. So that's all for today, folks. Thank you again. And I mean, if you're joining us later, see you in the next 15 minutes.